You want to grieve that shit? Then here it is. When no one gives you permission to grieve, when no one gives you permission to grieve your own grief, some of it hurts twice. It hurts even harder. And I'll tell you why. First, because the loss is none of their damn business, but you've had the loss. The second reason is because they're not giving you permission to grieve it, because they don't think you're allowed to grieve it. They call this disenfranchised grief. And it is brutal. Let me tell you, it's brutal, especially for the griever. Hey, my name is Sharon, and I'm the founder of the Grief School. And the Grief School is a private university and the place where healing begins. And today we're going to talk about the grief nobody claps for. They don't clap for this. They don't even stand up for this. That grief gets minimized, and it gets minimized and judged. You think the grief is going to start getting easier, but it's not. They're trying to erase it. They're erasing it. Disenfranchised grief is when your loss is not openly acknowledged by people in society. Societal support or public support is not mourned. You're not allowed to mourn it. In plain language, when society says that doesn't count, he was just your nephew. When they tell you that, let me tell you, it hurts. Society has rules about grief. They have written rules and they have unwritten rules. And they get to decide, well, they think they get to decide what matters. They decide who matters, which loss matters. They get to decide how you get to grieve this thing, how long you get to grieve this thing. They're the ones making the decision. How sad you're allowed to look, how sad you're allowed to be, whether you should be over it or not. Let me tell you, the rules are deep as far as what they have. You don't get to see these rules printed anywhere. They're not printed anywhere, but you feel them. You absolutely feel them. When you lose an ex-husband, they'll tell you things like, well, at least you were divorced. Doesn't matter that that was the love of your life from high school and that you're still in love with him even though you divorced him. When you lose a pregnancy, especially if that pregnancy was early, well, at least it was early. You know you can have more. When you lose a fur baby, you can get another one. Come on, let's go to the pound on Saturday. We'll get a new dog. When you lose someone to suicide, people get quiet, they get awkward, and they get judgy. And to me, that's the worst part. Let's say you were in an affair and your person died. You can't even attend the funeral. You're grieving someone who has abused you. They start to judge that. Well, at least you're not going to be getting abused anymore. And you're grieving the version of them that you wished you'd always had, even though you knew they were the abuser. For you, for disenfranchised grief, you get no casseroles, you get no sympathy, you get no sympathy cards, you get no support. That, my friend, is disenfranchised grief. And it makes people feel crazy. It makes grievers feel crazy. Why? Because you're hurting. You're hurting. Your heart is absolutely broken. But no one is reflecting that hurt back to you. Hey, Mama, how does this feel? How does your heart feel? It was Ken Dakota, the researcher, who coined the term, and he explained that this happens more often than you think. When society does not know how to handle your loss, or they don't see your loss as real, let me tell you, they go to disenfranchising it. Society does not see you as a legitimate griever. You're just the aunt. How's the mom doing? The relationship is stigmatized. The grief does not look the way people expect it. So let's talk about this last one, when it's stigmatized. If you're not crying publicly, people will start judging your grief and think you don't care. You shouldn't even care about him. If you're crying too much, they start thinking you're unstable. Dang, that bitch needs some therapy. If you're angry, they think you're bitter. What's she so mad about? Ooh, she should get help for that. And if you're numb, they think you're cold. So it doesn't matter how you show up. They're going to judge it, and they're going to judge it for themselves. Listen to me when I tell you, you can't win. You cannot win in these cases. So what happens? You, the griever, have nowhere to lay this grief, so you start pushing it down. You push it down in private. You push it down in open. You push it down in society, and you start pretending you're fine, and you minimize your own pain. And that's where the damage starts. When you start minimizing your own pain, then the damage starts. Because that grief does not get witnessed. It doesn't get tended to. You start turning it inward. And once we start turning the grief inward, it starts to look like shame to us. It becomes isolation. It becomes, maybe I shouldn't still be feeling this way. Listen carefully, because this matters and it counts to you. If your grief matters to you, then it is grief. It is your grief, and it is yours to do with as you see fit. Grief has always been about attachment. We had an attachment to this person, to this stand, to this thing. Not about public approval. We had an attachment to our love. If you're grieving someone and no one understands, that does not make your grief smaller. It makes your grief quieter. Not smaller, quieter. And quiet grief needs even more space and attention. Friend, you need to grieve that shit. You need to grieve that shit in quiet, and you need to grieve it out in the open, even if no one validates it. Even if you were not invited to the funeral, you can still do the grieving. Even if society doesn't have language for your loss, or they don't have space for your loss, you still need to grieve it. Grief is an emotional experience that happens in here. It has nothing to do with them. You don't need permission to heal. You need a place to process. You need a place to process that grief. You need a place that can hold that grief. And if you're tired of pretending that your loss does not count, that's exactly why you're feeling stuck. And that's exactly why I built the structure for grief, to have a place for it to exist. We don't vote on whether your grief qualifies. We process what is real. We process what is real in your heart. And I can't wait to meet you and talk more about this.